It began on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon inside a quiet suburban grocery store in Atlanta. Shoppers moved calmly through the aisles until a single voice, sharp and poisonous, cut through the air. A woman's scream, a crash, and then the sound of a frightened old man whispering, "Please, I didn't do anything." This wasn't just an argument. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was the moment a senior black citizen, a retired school librarian, found himself at the center of a shocking act of hate, one that would end with police cars, handcuffs, national coverage, and a lesson the entire community would never forget. Before we dive deeper, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful real-life stories that matter. The grocery store was quiet that afternoon. Soft music played over the speakers, and most customers were there for quick errands, a carton of milk, a loaf of bread, maybe a few vegetables before heading home. Among them was Elias Turner, a 72-year-old black man with silver hair, warm eyes, and the gentle posture of someone who had spent decades helping young students find their way through books and life. He wasn't in any hurry. His doctor had recently advised him to walk more, so he took his time. He had just reached for a can of soup when a shopping cart crashed into the back of his legs, not by accident, not lightly, but with force enough to make him stumble. He turned, confused. Behind him stood a woman in her late 40s, blonde hair tightly pulled back, expensive sunglasses perched on her head, even though they were indoors. Her expression was already twisted with anger. This was Karen Harper, a woman who had been known around town for her short fuse, her constant complaints, and above all, her belief that the world revolved around her rules. She glared at Elias as if he were an obstruction in her grocery store. And before he could apologize for something he hadn't even done, she launched into him with a scream that echoed across the aisle. "You people need to learn to move!" She barked, loud enough for half the store to hear. Elias froze. The words cut deep, not just because of the aggression, but because of the clear implication behind "you people." He had heard that tone before, decades ago in the South, when the world was a much harsher place for people who looked like him. But what made this moment dangerous wasn't just her words. It was that Karen was not done. Customers paused, startled. A young mother pulled her child closer. An elderly couple exchanged uncomfortable glances. Elias, trying to remain calm, gently said, "Ma'am, please." "There's no need for—" But that only fueled her rage. Karen shoved her cart forward again, this time slamming it against Elias's side. Hard. "You think you can stand in front of me?" she shouted. "You old people think you own everything?" A coworker from the produce section looked up, eyes wide. A cashier froze mid-scan, and a teenage girl from the next aisle cautiously peeked around the corner, pulling out her phone. Because she could tell, this situation was about to explode. The grocery store was unusually busy that afternoon. A soft hum of chatter hovered in the air, blending with the steady beeping of checkout scanners and the rolling wheels of carts. Most customers were moving through their routines, picking vegetables, comparing prices, checking lists. No one could have predicted that the quiet normalcy of that day was about to shatter. At aisle 7, Walter, the 74-year-old retired history teacher, moved slowly and carefully. He had lived in the neighborhood for decades, and though age had slowed his steps, he carried himself with a calm dignity. His hands were steady as he studied labels, trying to choose the right brand of oatmeal his doctor recommended. Walter never caused trouble. He was known for greeting people with a gentle smile and a polite, "Good afternoon." Even the store workers admired him. He remembered all their names, asked about their families, and always thanked them for their help. But in the same aisle stood a woman whose temper burned. Hotter than anyone realized, the woman customers whispered about, the one store employees tried to avoid. Her name was Linda, though many simply called her a Karen behind her back because of her behavior. She had a reputation for exploding over the smallest inconvenience. And on this day, she walked into the store already in a foul mood, irritated at a parking space. Dispute, she believed. She had lost unfairly. She was looking for something or someone to unleash her anger on. As fate would have it, she turned the corner just as Walter reached for a box on the shelf. Their carts gently touched, brushing wheels for a split second. Nothing more than a minor everyday moment. But Linda reacted as if she had been struck. She pulled her cart back sharply, eyes narrowing into slits, lips tightening with simmering hostility. For a moment, Walter didn't even realize she had taken offense. He simply adjusted his cart and stepped aside, the way he had done countless times for others. But Linda muttered loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Something sharp, something venomous, and unmistakably racial. A store employee nearby paused mid-step. A customer holding bread froze. A mother pushing a stroller slowly turned her head, sensing something was wrong. Walter heard her words, but he didn't react. Not yet. Not because the insult didn't hurt. Because he had heard this kind of thing before. Decades ago, in a world that looked different, but carried the same ugly shadows. He had learned long ago that reacting emotionally often gave hateful people the satisfaction they wanted, so he simply said, in a soft voice, "Ma'am, there's no need for that." But his calmness only fueled Linda's anger. She stepped closer, blocking the aisle with her cart as if guarding territory. Her voice grew louder. Her insults grew harsher. Her words, so filled with rage and bitterness, cut through the quiet store like a siren. Customers began to gather, not intentionally, but out of instinct. Humans naturally move toward conflict, especially when something feels wrong. Faces peeked around corners. Carts slowed to a stop. Some pulled out their phones, uncertain where things were headed, but sensing this was no ordinary argument. Walter kept his posture steady. His shoulders stayed relaxed. His hands didn't shake. Years of guiding students, mediating arguments, and facing injustice had taught him how to control the chaos around him. But Linda was spiraling. She accused him of things that made no sense, blocking her path, trying to intimidate her, even claiming he had threatened her, though anyone who knew Walter would laugh at the absurdity. Her voice grew sharper, her tone harsher, her face redder with every passing second. And then she said something that crossed a line many people in that store could not ignore. A slur. Ugly, hateful, echoing off the shelves. The store fell almost silent. Shoppers stiffened. A father covered his child's ears. An elderly woman shook her head in disbelief. And just a few feet away, a young woman who had seen everything pressed record on her phone. Walter closed his eyes briefly, not from fear, but from disappointment. At his age, he had hoped society had grown past moments like this. Yet here he stood, in 2025, watching history repeat itself in the aisles of a grocery store. Linda didn't notice the phones recording her. She didn't notice the store manager rushing toward aisle 7. She didn't notice how everyone around her had turned against her, silently condemning her behavior. All she saw was her anger. All she felt was her entitlement. All she wanted was to make Walter feel small. But Walter would not bend. He simply stood there, calm, steady and dignified, letting her anger burn itself out like a wildfire running out of oxygen. When she finally moved closer, raising her hand as if to shove past him, the crowd gasped. For the first time, Walter took a small step back, not from fear, but because he sensed the situation had crossed into dangerous territory. Before she could touch him, a firm voice cut through the aisle. "Ma'am, step back." It was the store manager. And not far behind him, 2 security officers were moving quickly, eyes locked on Linda. The confrontation was no longer just uncomfortable. It was no longer just disturbing. It had crossed into something far more serious. And the cameras were still recording. Everyone in that aisle knew something major was about to happen. Something that would change the tone of the entire store. Something that would turn a simple grocery trip into a turning point none of them would forget. The grocery store returned to a tense quiet after the confrontation. But something had shifted, something that Karen never expected. The people who had watched in silence earlier were no longer willing to stay quiet. They had just witnessed a senior black man being humiliated for no reason, and guilt weighed heavy on their shoulders. The first to step forward was a young mother, still holding her toddler against her chest. Her son looked wide-eyed and confused, sensing the tension in the air. She had been only a few feet away when Karen shoved and screamed at Harold, the veteran. At first, she froze, because that's what she had always done in situations of conflict. But watching Harold rub his shoulder and whisper, "I'm okay," to himself, broke something inside her. She walked closer, her voice trembling but determined. She approached the assistant manager and said, "I saw her push him." I saw everything. And with that simple sentence, the entire situation began to turn. Another witness, the teenager who had dropped a can of beans in shock, earlier grabbed his phone and walked toward the group. His hands were still shaking, but not from fear this time. He had recorded the entire confrontation. Without hesitation, he played the video for the store's security officer. The audio was clear. The shove was visible, and Karen's words, loud, hateful, and undeniable, echoed across the small office. While Karen continued yelling that she was the one being victimized, the truth was unraveling around her. Two more people came forward. An elderly couple who had known Harold for years. They had seen him around the neighborhood, always polite, always helpful. They spoke quietly, but their words carried weight. They told the manager that Harold was a retired bus driver, a war veteran, and a man who had faced more hardship with grace than Karen ever would. With every witness statement, Karen's confidence cracked. Her entitlement began to crumble. And for the first time since the incident began, she looked uncomfortable. But Harold, he remained steady, quiet, sitting on the same bench near the customer service desk, hands folded, waiting for the process to unfold. A retired man who once served his country, now targeted simply for his skin color, but even then, he refused to raise his voice. His silence was louder than Karen's screams. Then something unexpected happened. Something that changed the entire direction of the story. A store employee, a young woman who had previously stayed behind the counter, gathered the courage to walk toward Harold. She knelt down, her voice soft but sincere. "Sir, do you need water? Do you need anything while they take care of this?" Harold gave a tired smile and shook his head, thanking her politely. That moment, small, gentle, became a spark of human decency that spread quickly among the staff. The manager ordered the security officer to escort Karen to the back office while police were contacted. Karen screamed about her rights, threatening to sue the store, the witnesses, the entire system. But for the first time, nobody reacted. Nobody stepped aside for her. Nobody validated her tantrum. Instead, all eyes remained on Harold, on the man who had endured humiliation without losing his dignity. As Karen disappeared into the back hallway, the crowd around Harold grew. People apologized, others offered to stay and give statements, and some simply placed a hand on Harold's shoulder before walking away. The entire atmosphere of the store shifted from fear to unity. The store's security officer reviewed the footage from multiple angles. The teenagers' recording matched the store cameras perfectly, and now they had more than enough evidence. When Karen returned, escorted by security, she looked shaken, trembling, though she tried to hide it. She expected people to be on her side. She expected sympathy, support, validation. Instead, she faced a wall of silent customers who had made their choice. And it wasn't her. Two police officers arrived minutes later. As soon as they stepped inside, the store manager presented the recordings and written statements. The young mother stepped forward again, this time with courage that surprised even her. The officers listened carefully, their expressions growing more serious with every second. Karen tried her old defense, playing the victim, claiming she was attacked, that Harold started it, that everyone was lying. But this time, her words fell harder than ever. She was no longer facing a crowd she could intimidate. She was facing the truth. And the truth had witnesses. When the officer finally turned toward Harold, he spoke gently. "Sir, thank you for your patience. We've reviewed everything, and I want you to know we're taking this very seriously." Harold nodded. That's all he did, a simple, humble nod. By the time the officers finished their review, Karen's fate was sealed. The store erupted into whispers as the officers approached her. Her face turned pale. Her voice cracked. And suddenly, the woman who shouted insults without fear couldn't speak at all. The witnesses watched, silently as the officers told her she was being placed under arrest for assault and disorderly conduct, with possible hate crime consideration pending investigation. Karen's jaw dropped. She tried to scream. She tried to argue. She tried to blame everyone in the store. But this time, no one listened. No one believed her. No one defended her. Because the truth was finally louder than her voice. And for the first time that day, Harold allowed himself to breathe. Not in relief, but in something deeper. Something he had learned long ago in life. No matter how loud injustice is, The truth will always catch up. The tension inside the grocery store had settled, but the consequences of that moment were only beginning to unfold. As Mr. Harris sat on a small bench near the customer service counter, the weight of the incident pressed on him more heavily than the strike he had endured. He was a man who had learned long ago how to withstand cruelty, but there was something deeply unsettling about the vulnerability he had experienced in that aisle earlier. He wasn't angry, he was tired. Tired of being treated like he didn't belong in the very country he had served. But the community wasn't willing to let this moment fade into silence. By now, customers who had witnessed everything were outside talking to officers, giving statements, replaying footage, and describing the escalation with remarkable consistency. For perhaps the first time, Karen realized she had misjudged the world she was living in. She had assumed the crowd would disperse, that the officers would shrug it off as a misunderstanding, and that she would walk away with her confidence intact. Instead, she stood alone, surrounded by people recounting what she had done. The officers reviewing the footage grew quieter, as each frame exposed the reality of her actions. The shove, the insults, the deliberate targeting of a man who had offered no threat. The embarrassment Karen had expected. Mr. Harris to feel was now curling back onto her with relentless force. Inside the store, employees gently reassured customers, but their eyes frequently drifted toward the door where the confrontation had unfolded. The incident had shaken them, reminding them that safety in familiar places is never guaranteed, especially for people like Mr. Harris, the grocery manager, who had seen Mr. Harris shop there weekly without ever causing a disturbance, stood by him momentarily, not with pity, but with respect for how calmly he had held himself. Outside, the officers approached Karen with a tone far more direct than before. The review was complete. The evidence was clear, and the consequences were unavoidable. Meanwhile, Mr. Harris remained unaware of what was happening outside. He didn't crave punishment for Karen. He wanted accountability. He wanted acknowledgement that what had happened wasn't just rudeness. It was a deliberate act rooted in something society too often ignored. As the officers returned inside to speak with him, the energy of the store shifted. Conversations quieted, steps slowed, and attention focused entirely on him. One officer asked him a few final questions, verifying minor details, confirming his well-being, and ensuring he understood the process from here. For many in the store, this was the first time they had seen a system respond with firmness instead of hesitation. It was justice, not dramatic, not vengeful, but steady and necessary. And in that moment, the community seemed to understand how important it was that people like Mr. Harris were not left to fight their battles alone. When he finally stepped outside, escorted gently for his comfort, he found a crowd gathered, not in chaos but in solidarity. Strangers nodded respectfully. Some offered quiet gestures of support. Aides offered to accompany him home. It wasn't pity. It was recognition of the dignity he had displayed under pressure. Karen watched from the opposite side, handcuffs secured, her confidence replaced by disbelief and fear. The consequences she had triggered through her own actions were unavoidable now, and for the first time, she was forced to confront a truth she had spent years ignoring. The world wouldn't bend for her cruelty anymore. The officers guided her toward the patrol car as she pleaded with them, insisting it was all blown out of proportion. But the community wasn't listening anymore. They had already chosen whom they stood with. For Mr. Harris, the day that had begun as a simple grocery run had transformed into something far heavier. But in the midst of the chaos, he had witnessed something rare, a moment where the world chose decency over division. And though the wound of the encounter lingered, the response of the community began stitching something back together inside him. The story was far from over, because what happened next would not only change Karen's life, it would spark a conversation far bigger than both of them. The days that followed the incident at the grocery store carried a quiet heaviness across the community. The video of Karen's attack on Mr. Nathaniel, an elderly black senior who had survived segregation, worked 2 jobs for 40 years, and raised 3 children on his own, continued to spread far beyond the town's borders. But something else spread with it, a sense of responsibility. People who once moved through their routines without thinking now paused, replaying the moment when a stranger's cruelty collided with an old man's dignity It wasn't just a viral clip anymore, it became a mirror the town couldn't look away from. City leaders held emergency meetings. Store managers implemented new training. Residents who had been silent all their lives about racism suddenly found themselves speaking up, challenging friends, neighbors, even themselves. The community wasn't embarrassed because the world saw the incident. They were embarrassed because it happened at all. Nathaniel, meanwhile, quietly returned to his life. He didn't brag and he didn't ask for any special attention. But everywhere he went, someone stopped him, sometimes to apologize for what happened, sometimes just to say thank you. Many simply wanted to shake his hand, because the grace he showed in the face of hatred had touched something deeper than anger ever could. The police released their final statement. Karen faced multiple charges, including harassment, assault, and discriminatory targeting. The fines were heavy, but the public reaction was heavier. She moved under the weight of a reputation she had created herself, one that no legal punishment could soften. She tried to issue a public apology, but most people agreed. It came too late, and for the wrong reasons. Meanwhile, the grocery store created a scholarship fund in Nathaniel's name for local youth, an idea proposed not by corporate headquarters, but by employees who had watched the incident unfold. They wanted something good to rise from something terrible, and Nathaniel agreed only if the scholarship focused on building compassion. The following Sunday morning, something unusual happened. At the park near the center of town, a crowd gathered, not for protest, not for anger, but for unity. Families of every background stood together in a quietly powerful moment. Local pastors, veterans, business owners, teachers, and teenagers surrounded Nathaniel in a circle of support. He didn't give a long speech. He didn't talk about laws or punishments or race or videos. He simply said, "Hate may shout, but kindness echoes longer." And in that moment, everyone knew he was right. The town didn't change overnight, but it changed. People became more aware, more vocal, more protective of one another. The grocery store became a place where employees stepped in quickly if anything seemed wrong. Strangers held each other accountable. And long after the online outrage faded, the local impact remained. Karen's attack was a spark, but Nathaniel's response was the flame that lit something brighter. Weeks later, a new sign appeared outside the store entrance. It was small, simple, and easy to walk past if you weren't paying attention. But for those who knew the story, it meant everything. It read, "Respect is free. Give it freely." And under those words, in modest type, it said, "In honor of Mr. Nathaniel Carter." The world would forget the viral clip soon enough. But the people who lived through it never forgot the lesson. A community is stronger when it protects its most vulnerable. Courage doesn't always look like confrontation. And sometimes, the quiet strength of a senior citizen teaches an entire town what humanity should look like. And that was the legacy that outlived the outrage.